Good evening. Welcome to The Big Question on NDTV Profit. I'm Vikram Oza. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in New Delhi. This visit loaded with history, strategy, and also timing. Putin is returning to India after a 4-year gap. He was last here in the year 2021. So now he's here to reinforce what both countries call a special and privileged strategic partnership. But this is not a routine summit. It comes with military, energy, and geopolitical stakes running higher than at any point in decades. In the run-up to the talks that the two countries are going to have, New Delhi, of course, has already cleared the key deliverables from ratifying the long-pending military logistic pact, which is called RELOS, the Reciprocal Exchange of Logistic Support. That has been ratified. Also, India has secured a $2 billion deal to lease another Russian nuclear-powered attack submarine. So the agenda for the Putin visit is stretching across defense co-production, long-term oil contracts, there is civil nuclear cooperation, fertilizers, recruitment of Indian workers, and yes, a new payments framework as well, which could include the dirham route. It links Russia's SPFS system, which is short for System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS, and that could be linked with India's RuPay network. All of this is happening as the US tightens sanctions on Russian oil. It is cracking down on major suppliers like Rosneft and Lukoil, and it presses India now to reduce dependence on Russian crude. And this even as Western pressure is growing to end the Ukraine war. That pressure has been building on Russia. So what's on the table this time between the two countries as they meet? India is, of course, looking at an additional S-400 missile system, and they're even exploring Russia's next-gen S-500 Prometheus, along with potential cooperation on the Sukhoi 57 stealth fighter with deeper technology transfer this time. And on the economic side, New Delhi wants long-term certainty on discounted Russian oil. India is looking for solutions to the payments headache, also expanded agricultural access to the Russian market, and a push to narrow that $59 billion trade deficit. It's a yawning one, which incidentally is India's second largest after China. And Russia, for its part, has signaled fresh interest in India, from seafood and shrimp imports to high-yield agriculture, fertilizers, and plans by Sberbank to expand operations and invest surplus rupee funds into Indian government securities. Now, Russia is India's fourth largest trading partner. Bilateral trade has hit $68.7 billion in FY25. But the imbalance over there is quite stark. India is exporting just $4.8 billion, and oil and arms are dominating those imports. So no Indian export category to Russia is actually crossing that $1 billion mark. In fact, India has a trade surplus with only 2 of its top 15 partners. That's the US and the other country is the Netherlands. And the biggest surplus, which is $41 billion, is with the United States. So compare India's trade with the US and then with Russia. With the US, India trades across pharma, auto parts, electronics, and textiles, and each category is worth billions. With Russia, that relationship is narrow. It is down to crude oil and defense hardware and fertilizers. So that asymmetry is at the heart of India's challenge. But defense is still the cornerstone in the relationship that India has with Russia. It has been so over the years. It is the backbone of their ties. From aircraft carriers to nuclear submarines and missile systems to joint production, Moscow has been New Delhi's primary supplier for decades. But the dependence is shrinking now. Russia's share of Indian defense imports has actually fallen from 78%, that's between the year 2001 and 2004, now, between the year 2021 and 2024, it has come down from 78% to 34%. Even so, Russia remains India's #1 arms supplier. And the partnership today is more about co-development and technology transfer than that dynamic of a buyer and seller. But then what about the oil rush and the new conundrum that has come up? Because since 2022, India has leaned so heavily on discounted Russian crude. From $1 billion of Russian crude, that was the dependence in 2017. This year alone, it is $57 billion, with Russia supplying up to 35% of India's crude oil needs. But that landscape too is shifting. after President Trump's additional 25% tariff penalty for Russian oil purchases. And that has taken the total tariffs on India to 50%, and that has been hurting. Now the new US sanctions targeting Russian suppliers. With that, India's imports this December are projected to hit a 3-year low. Now some Indian refiners are sourcing non-sanctioned Russian grades. Others, like private refiner Reliance, they've stopped processing Russian oil entirely. So it's a complex moment for India's foreign policy. This Modi-Putin meeting is unfolding at a moment when Russia is simultaneously, one, trying to stabilize a crucial legacy relationship with Moscow. Secondly, India is managing the world's toughest sanctions regime around Russian oil. And thirdly, diversifying defense. And they want to move it away from Russian systems. And yet at the same time, we're trying to deepen our strategic, military, and economic cooperation with our largest trading partner, which, of course, is the United States. Just hours ago in Delhi, India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and the Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, they've jointly laid a wreath at the National War Memorial. It's a symbolic reminder of the decades-old military partnership that still shapes India's strategic choices. So that is the backdrop. Now, can India strike the right balance between Russia and the US in this historic Putin visit? That's a big question we're asking tonight, and we're taking it across to our panel of experts. And joining us tonight is Phunchok Stobdan. He's former ambassador and Russia-Eurasia expert. He joins us on the show, along with Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad. He's a defense expert. Rajoli S Jayaprakash is also with us, junior fellow at ORF, and Deepak Bhojwani, former Indian ambassador, also joining us on the big question. So let me begin by asking you, Phunchok Stobdan, you know, if you try and compare the kind of relationship that India and Russia had before Trump came into the second term that he has as President of the United States, and before these tariffs, the heavy tariffs came in, how has that impacted India-Russia ties since that has happened, since Trump has come into the second term and these tariffs have been imposed?
I think the relationship and the context has become far more serious, far more intense, I suppose, compared to what it used to be maybe a year ago, partly because of the changes that have taken place. But I think this is typically a symbolic in the international relationship, you know, the visits of the head of states to another country. And at this juncture, President Putin's visit is really, really very important symbolically, at least, both for Russia and India, to show that we are not isolated, despite all that happened in the last 1 year, what Trump did to curtail the Russians and the Indian interests everywhere.
Yes.
So I think this is to demonstrate the solidarity, the unity, and I won't say balance. Balance is a very difficult thing. You know, balancing act is a very old phrase used during the Cold War, but balancing of power is no longer important. It's an outright politics, outright political stand, geopolitical stand one nation takes in favor of the others. So I think this is more than a balancing act.
Yes.
And I think this visit is very, very crucial.
So what is that messaging that is going out on the defense front with the ratification coming in on reloss? Lieutenant General S. Prasad, this question to you. Now that ratification on the reciprocal exchange of logistics support has come through, is that a signal, is that a message which is talking to the US as well, that India is actually doubling down on military interoperability?
Well, not really. If you look at the acquisitions of military hardware of India for the last 2 decades, you will find that this is one country, India is one country, which buys the best equipment available in that particular level, whether it's the tanks or the guns or the aircraft, which best suits Indian condition and it best suits our economic condition. We find that we bought Rafale from France. We bought a large number of military hardware and platforms from US in the last 8 to 10 years, and our dependence on Russia and military aid, military purchases from Russia continues. The most important thing at the moment is this. While very large number of items must have been already discussed with the frequent meetings between the foreign ministers of India and foreign ministers of Russia, as also about the NSA who frequently visited Moscow in the last 6 or 8 months. Many of these issues have already been finalized. That's the way diplomacy works. But what is most important is, and that I think will be publicly not even be shared with the public, is what is going to happen tonight at the Prime Minister's private dinner. Now, the issue is, with the sanctions put in by the United States on the oil and other trade between Russia and India is a serious matter.
Sure.
If you recall, President Trump has even mentioned that he wants to make sure that the BRICS people, the BRICS countries don't hijack the entire system, of monetary system in the world. Today, we need to discuss and finalize, and I think the two heads of state who are meeting tonight for dinner will discuss this in very private as to what can be done without overtly annoying the American president, but also circumvent or find ways and means to overcome these sanctions that have been levied. I think the answer would be also perhaps what kind of rupee and ruble trade that can take place.
Yes.
Many years ago, you'll recall, when the large number of agricultural equipment were being exchanged between the two countries, including leather goods and other garments, a lot of trade used to take place in rupee-ruble trade. Is that the answer? And how much is the answer? Of course, obviously, the trade imbalance is very large, as you've seen.
Yes.
We only do about 4 or 5 billion, and they do about 60 to 80 billion. So the issue today is, and the primary issue which I think needs discussion between the two leaders, independently of the delegations, is how to circumvent, how to find ways and means that you do not upset the Americans, as also continue our trade between Russia and America, in which manner to avoid these taxes and the tariffs.
So
this is the most critical part.
It
which
is.
I think is going to be discussed very privately today.
Yes.
Tomorrow onwards, it's all delegations and the 8 ministers that I hear, they will discuss each of those things. Many of those things have already been ironed out, whether it's S-400, take the example of the 2 aircrafts.
Yes.
The F-35 and the Su-57. India is good. I'm not an Air Force guy. I don't fly planes. But I can tell you, India will go for an aircraft which is better between the two of them. From what we know as laymen from outside, Su-57 is far ahead, whether it's in range, whether it's in load capacity, whether it's endurance. You will find, if you read these through the newspapers and to other defense magazines, you will find Su-57 far goes beyond the F-35. We have to see how to balance this with America, because after all, the Americans are also looking at India in many ways to sell equipment to us.
Correct.
And to also retain our friendship as far as the AUKUS is concerned, and as far as those, Southeast Asian, Japan, Australia, India, and America are concerned.
Correct.
Those have also got to be kept in mind.
Yes.
So it's a very complex situation. What is important is that this is a very critical moment. Maybe we've had 20 meetings between the two heads of state.
Correct.
But this particular one, which is taking place under the shadow of the American tariffs and the Ukraine-Russia war, and the India's phrase that this is not an era of war, we have to resolve problems by dialogue and by diplomacy.
Yes, but on that point, Lieutenant General, on that point, and perhaps I should take this across to Ambassador Bhojwani, because you raised an important issue when it comes to that rupee-ruble trade. With India running this massive $59 billion trade deficit, Ambassador Bhojwani, versus that $41 billion surplus that we have with the US. So I'm just wondering if that economic imbalance is going to distort India's room for diplomatic maneuver between India and Russia at this time, with that kind of economic imbalance that we have, and if you're going to strike a more rupee-ruble tilted kind of relationship than we have in the recent past at least, is that not going to irk the Americans?
I think in the first place, Mr. Oza, we should realize that our relationship with Russia and our relationship with the US have to be treated differently. It's not a zero-sum game. The Americans may want us to believe it is, but I don't think we should agree to that. As our External Affairs Minister said the other day, what we need to do is recognize how different regimes are behaving and react accordingly. If the US is behaving in a manner where it feels it can radically alter its foreign policy priorities and its actions, I believe we have the right to do what we feel is in our interest. And the time-tested relationship with the Russians has shown that we should amplify the relationship no matter what, Now, you're talking about an imbalance. Let me remind your viewers that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we worked up a $30 billion trade deficit with the Soviet Union, which is the successor happens to be Russia to that state. And we paid it all off, despite the fact that by the time we paid it off, I mean, in the early 90s, Russia and India went through seismic economic shifts, as we all know. But nevertheless, India paid off that debt, and it paid it off at the rate which it was supposed to be before the ruble devalued considerably after the Russian changes took place in the 90s. Okay? So we've had these kind of imbalances with the predecessor state to Russia, because we have imported more from Russia historically. What Mr. Putin's visit is seeking to do, and will to considerable extent do, is balance that trade somewhat by importing more from India. But if we do need to get more from Russia, whatever that may be, whether it's strategic material, whether it's energy, whether it's nuclear power plants, whatever, I think we should go right ahead, because the Russians have never treated us as if we are debtors and have never deprived us of opportunities. Even despite the debt that we've had with Russia, we've been allowed, our companies, for instance, ONGC, BPCL, and the other oil companies of India, the public sector companies, have invested billions of dollars and realized considerable profits from Russian oil fields. So the relationship has been very beneficial to India, and I don't think we should allow imaginary sort of phobias about having a deficit to get in the way.
So it is very clear in terms of India's stance from what we are hearing from the ambassador and Mr. Stobdan. Perhaps you can answer this for us. Even as India is now trying to do this entire balancing act, and like ambassador is pointing out, that there is a stark difference between the relationship that India has with the US and what it has with Russia. But that pivot is very certain that India is looking after its internal interests. I don't know how you see this, but perhaps you can tell us whether India's stance today in geopolitics, when it comes to concentrating on our needs first, with this visit, the sanctions have already been imposed on Rosneft and Lukoil. That kind of pressure, I'm just using that as an example, is it going to reshape Russia's expectations from India at this visit? And can that American kind of pressure that is building up change our nature of the kind of trade that we've had and the defense ties that we've had?
I think the Russian options are limited. If they want to diversify import from India, I think they will have to go for a big item projects like the migration, which now perhaps the two leaders are now going to talk about. The mobility agreement of taking some 70,000 Indians in the Siberian region, or maybe in the Vladivostok area, for working in the military and the industrial areas. Now that would be a grand initiative. How to take it forward would be very critical, not just in terms of the relationship, but also balancing what you are saying in terms of economic and deficit and all that thing. So these are very, very important. But I would say, if you treat India-Russia relationship only as a market dynamics, it won't work. Then this utility items like fighter jets and these things, that will come in the category. But to me, I think India-Russia relationship signifies far more deeper.
Sure.
If you go to Moscow, I have seen myself, a lady finds a small empty packet of tea, with the Taj Mahal photograph on that, somewhere on the street. She picks it up and puts it in the frame at the house. Now, it's so much deep, feeling that they have for India. So it's the spirit which is very important, and the trust,
right,
which is driving the relationship. Not so much F-16 or what do you call it, S-400 or S-5. That will come and go depending on the purchasing power of India or whatever requirement that we have.
Right.
But I think it's the spirit of relationship. And end of the day, it is only Russia which is going to save us Kashmir. Because otherwise, the way it looks like that Americans are going to take, the Kashmir away from us to put it with Pakistan, which is not easy. But history shows that it's only Russia which has able to protect our interests when it comes to Kashmir issue.
Right. So even as we talk about how there is a tradition of trust between the two countries, Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, when you talk about the defense relationship in particular that India has with Russia, historically now moving from that buyer-seller to co-development. So there is a restructuring, as it were. How important is that in the current dynamics? Because this submarine lease deal, it reinforces that very trend. Or do you think that shows India still dependent on Russian platforms? Do you think it's actually changing the nature of the relationship, even though the basis, the foundation, like Mr. Phunchok is pointing out, is trust?
Of course, yes. The trust is the most important thing. Russia has been with us on a strategic plane right from the 71 war, which we cannot forget. And thereafter, we have found that continuously throughout the period, the Russian and Indian friendship has only grown by leaps and bounds. Today, if you look at India-Russian relationship, the Russians fully appreciate and understand that India is a country which is following the policy of genuinely non-alignment. In fact, it is alignment of what we feel wherever is the best issue available to us. We have gone to the world to say, we will buy the oil from where it suits us. We will buy the weapons from where it suits us. We will import and export things from where it suits us. We have a national interest first. That is the story which is not so prominently known a few years ago. Today, India is known world over in the fact that India is looking after itself. What is India's interest is what is paramount to us. Now, in this particular case, today, India also has another very interesting position to exploit, if I may use the word, that today a large number of people, and if you, I think I somewhere in yesterday's newspaper or this morning's newspaper, it even took an article out to say that the NATO countries, although openly they're saying,
Lieutenant General, we seem to have an audio issue over there, and we'll try and rectify it. But I want to take this point across to Ambassador Bhojwani very quickly because we are running short of time. Ambassador, can India, you think, sustainably balance this discounted Russian oil that we are hoping for, the American sanctions? We don't know when a trade deal is going to take place with the United States, the kind of defense diversification that India is looking for right now, and that $132 billion trade relationship with the United States. Do you think that balancing can happen in a way that is sustainable?
I don't see why you have to use the word balancing again and again. Our relationship with the US will proceed. The only difference is that President Trump has sought to link our purchase of Russian oil to tariffs on goods which we export to the US. That's the only linkage. And that's a spurious linkage. We've established that we can buy Russian oil if it's in our interest. Of course, the problem is that it has diminished, not because we don't want to buy Russian oil, but because increasingly the ships that carry this Russian oil are being sanctioned. So they're not becoming available. And there are still over 1 million barrels a day being imported even now as we speak. So as a result of that, it's not as if we're not buying Russian oil. We are. As far as the defense relationship is concerned, to your earlier question about our diversification and indigenization and so on, you must remember that we have been manufacturing BrahMos missiles, which were supplied to us initially by the Russians. And now we are even selling them to countries like the Philippines and so on, with the collaboration of the Russians. It has been a win-win relationship all through on defense. And this has been the case for decades since we started making the MiGs and automatic weapons, which were initially supplied, the technology supplied by the Russians.
Right. So Rajoli hasn't had a chance to speak, and we lost connection with him for a bit. But Rajoli, if you can tell us from your perspective, Ambassador doesn't believe that this is about any kind of balancing. Would you agree with that or not? Because Moscow, when you look at what it really wants from India at this moment, perhaps that could be different from what it has wanted in the past? Yes, defense orders, oil commitments as well, but the kind of agricultural access that India needs from Moscow, the strategic signaling that sends out to the West, is that something that Russia also needs with closer ties right now? Have the needs changed? And is that going to impact how these talks progress?
Actually, I agree with the ambassador because I think the word balancing is just taken a bit too far because I think that you have to understand that the premise of the India-Russia bilateral summits have been taking place for the last 20-ish years. So I think it's not to do with hedging with one power or the other. It's more to do basically with keeping the bilateral relations relevant. So in that light, even if there is a new trade pillar that has been discovered, or trade being the flavor of the year, it's still about keeping bilateral partnerships relevant. It's not about balancing one power with another power. Even though the United States, even though Trump is the first leader who has tried to punish India for its relations with Russia by imposing secondary tariffs, but it's not about balancing with one power or the other. I think it's always been clear that our equation with the US is completely different from our equation with Russia and with any other power to begin with, because that's not the foreign policy we follow by balancing one power with another.
It certainly, yes, of course. And indeed, how this entire visit pans out, as historic as it turns out to be, India hosting President Putin at a time of global churn, the challenge in navigating an increasingly polarized world without losing strategic autonomy is the basic focus where we are coming in from. We'll have to see how New Delhi is going to take the oldest defense partner and its largest trading partner, how they are going to be looking at both of these, even if it's individually, but we are going to be looking at it holistically in terms of India's approach in times to come. But thank you very much, Phunchok Stobdan, Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, Rajoli and Deepak Bhojwani. Thank you very much for joining us with your insights on this discussion here on The Big Question on NDTV Profit. And indeed, we'll keep our focus as President Putin makes his way to India. We've got our eyes and ears peeled for all the developments on the trade front and indeed the defense front as well. So all of it here on NDTV Profit. But for the moment, from me and the entire team on The Big Question, thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.